This story begins on a celestial island, so named because it floats lonely in the sky. In this beautiful place there is a town surrounded by beautiful and dense forests, where cheerful people live. But one judgment day, something happened that changed the lives of the local people once and for all. As the people looked up at the sky, they noticed that something was rapidly approaching them, and then it landed with great force and buried itself in the ground. It turned out to be a monster-infested tower with many floors. It went so deep into the ground that it broke the earth's crust and made the sea tremble. Over time, people even came up with a personal nickname for it called Babylon. What is possible to see right now is only the top. In fact, the Tower of Babylon is located deep underground. The fall also caused a tremendous amount of damage to the outside world in the form of civilian casualties. Confused and numb with terror, people cried out to the heavens, because they wanted answers to all their questions. After a while the prayers were answered, some bright light reappeared in the heavens, and warriors could be seen slowly descending. In the beginning, people didn't quite understand how they could help. But in the process of dialogue, the warriors promised that they would definitely clean up all the monsters in Babylon and restore peace on this island. Over time, they also liked the tower had their own nickname, and it sounded like the Challengers. These guys really turned out to be very powerful, and all the residents of the heavenly island welcomed them. Because whoever defeated the monsters and saved the peaceful people undoubtedly became not only a hero, but the very real god, because the Challengers were the only chance for salvation. Then we move on to the main character in this story, a girl named Lara, who right now is in the middle of a tower and doesn't know how to get out of it. A little backstory: Lara has a little brother named Travis, a bad boy who's always getting into trouble. A real parasite sucking all the blood from his elderly parents, who don't even reprimand him for his bad behavior. Then Lara wondered what she could do to make her brother stop causing trouble, because ordinary words don't work on him, you need something stronger. She had the crazy idea to offer Travis to go to the dungeon together so he could see the monsters of Babylon, and his brain would finally fall into place. Lara also didn't forget to take into account that there were now very active challengers working there, so the inside wasn't as dangerous as it used to be. On the background of strong emotions, and a great desire to settle down her brother, the girl did not even think about the consequences, and immediately ran to him to tell him about her thoughts. Also, for more interest, she reminded Travis that in the dungeon there are precious ingots, taking which you can live comfortably for the rest of your life. As her brother had been thinking about coming down for a long time, when he heard such a unique offer from his sister, he just couldn't resist and immediately agreed. So at her own risk, Lara went here and almost immediately encountered the first troubles. As soon as the girl woke up, she immediately looked around to see what floor she was on, and when the situation became clearer, she immediately wondered where her brother had gone. Initially, Lara assumed that he had just left first, so she thought it would be a good idea to go after him. On the way, she noticed that someone dropped a valuable object, came closer to it, examined it in detail, and realized that it definitely belonged to one of the applicants. Then the potential owner of the item appeared on the horizon, and Lara immediately ran after him to give it to him. For some reason the man was not the most talkative and nodded at best, and when the girl told him that she was lost and asked for help, he immediately refused and started to move away from her. But as they say, it's okay, if this one is too busy and it's worth waiting for another one. In this case, Lara told him that she was not offended at all, and was not going to detain anyone. At first, there was the same silence in response, and then the warrior drew his sword and gave a decisive blow, after which the girl lost her life on the spot. Why he did so is difficult to answer. Lara woke up in the same place as the first time. Her brother was still not there, and she didn't understand what had just happened, but as she woke up again, she assumed that it was a terrible dream, and the challenger would never do such a thing. Being in such a terrible situation, the girl began to say out loud that as soon as the challengers helped her, she would do everything to glorify them. Suddenly Lara felt a strong sense of déjà vu, looked around and saw two more warriors in front of her. The first thing she did was to introduce herself to them and ask for help, because she was lost and had no idea where the exit was. From the look on their faces, you could tell they were puzzled, so they decided to consult among themselves. The problem was that the man had never seen Lara in town before, so he couldn't be 100% sure it wasn't some dangerous monster. In such cases, the guys usually just pass by, but this time they thought it would be a good idea to get rid of the girl to gain experience points. Lara was standing right next to them, and she couldn't believe that the applicants were talking about her and thinking about getting more experience, and, if they were lucky, a powerful item. It's a direct indication that they see her as a real monster, not a normal person. In the end, after weighing all the pros and cons, the man insisted on destroying Lara, and at the same time demonstrating on her a new skill he had recently acquired. Even though it was obvious, the girl still refused to believe her ears, and continued to say that she was a normal resident of the city. As soon as Lara saw the challenger activate his electric fist, the first thing that popped into her head was the question of why he was going to attack, and then came the realization that she should try to run away, because there was nothing else to expect here but a critical hit. To be honest, the man didn't even think that the target would try to escape, because as a rule it doesn't happen, and if it wasn't for his girlfriend, who hit Lara in the leg with an accurate shot from the bow, she would probably run away. When Lara realized that this was the end of her escape, she involuntarily began to release tears, and the man ruthlessly reactivated his fist, and tested his new ability on her. After that, the girl lost her life on the spot, and the guys were delighted, because the effect of the blow was simply flying. Unfortunately, this was not the end of such situations. The girl even managed to lose count of how many times in a day she was destroyed. Because of this, she began to get the impression that the time is completely looped, and the other way will not be, lost faith, for absolutely any positive outcome. All the people she met were very similar to the applicants, but for some reason they behaved inappropriately. Instead of helping Lara to get out, they constantly destroyed her, and talked about some magical objects. But despite the terrible moral state, deep down, the desire to get out was very great. When the girl moved back to her original place, she started to try to remember how she got here and where her little brother had gone, and eventually she began to doubt that she had ever had a little brother. This is a direct indication that her brain is under a lot of stress. When she was already lying in one place and not moving anywhere, after a certain period of time, Lara heard someone walking and talking about something. Of course, against the background of fear of losing her life once again, she got up sharply, and immediately began to run away in an unknown direction, just not to meet anyone. On the way, the girl saw a dark room, which was illuminated by a single lantern. Out of curiosity, she decided to enter it, because to find a lantern in such an area is very rare. Lara then looked forward and saw a bloody door in front of her, which most likely leads to a labyrinth. If to speak frankly, the girl was very afraid to go into it, because she suspected that it could be a trap, and from any angle, this place looks very dangerous. But still, curiosity began to take over, and in case something pops out, Lara will throw a flashlight at it. As soon as the girl crossed the threshold, a portal was formed in front of her. From the outside it looked very bright and beautiful, but no one knows what awaits a person after moving. In order to test its work, Lara decided to throw a flashlight into it, and see if something would come back to her or not. In the end, even after several minutes of waiting, nothing came back. Because of the intense fear in her head, the girl was almost 100% sure that if she went inside, she would lose her life, or after a while she would be destroyed by one of the applicants. Lara's hand was gently stretched out, and then the portal pulled her inside, without the possibility of refusing the teleportation. As soon as Lara stepped fully inside, it immediately disappeared. When the transfer process was completed, for some reason Lara was not immediately on Earth, but in the air. Because of this she had to fall for quite a long time, but the landing was soft, because some unearthly force at the very last moment stopped her, and gently put her on the floor. At first the girl couldn't believe her eyes, because she saw the long-awaited nature around her, and the usual real earth, instead of stone tiles. Then the question arose in her mind, whether the portal had really moved her outside, and now there was a chance to return to normal life. But then she slowly began to realize that even with teleportation, there was no way she could have been outside the tower, because she had fallen from such a great height and had not been injured at all, something that couldn't happen in normal life. But nevertheless, one should not be upset, because at least one thing is clear: this is not the labyrinth of the first floor, and if Lara continues in the same spirit, then perhaps soon she will be able to find a real way out. Suddenly the girl heard a man approaching her. Despite his good intentions, and the usual desire to get acquainted, in great fear, Lara immediately began to run away, because she realized how hard it was to get here, and in no case does not want to get hit with a sword again. But unfortunately this time, as in the past, she could not get far away, because there was an obstacle in the way. The man in turn realized that something was obviously wrong with her, so he thought it would be a good idea to try to catch up, and ask what he could do to help. Since the nerves were at their limit, for a while Lara was completely unable to speak, in which case the guy decided to ask her first. How did she end up here? Because according to him, the girls should be on the first floor. At that moment, Lara was just insanely afraid to say something wrong, and worried that he wouldn't attack her, because she had no idea what would happen to her if it happened on this floor. By the way, this handsome man's name is Charlie, and in response to try to clarify the situation, Lara decided to ask if he knew her. Judging by the expression on the stranger's face, it could be understood that this question was completely unexpected for him. But Charlie decided to refrain from answering, because he supposed that even if he did, the girl would not understand anything. Of course, she didn't like that, and began to ask more questions at once, because she wanted to know some useful information for herself. At one point Lara noticed that the guy made a movement, very similar to the movement of the challengers who attacked her. It made her wary, because usually after its completion, the girl was killed on the spot. But when she looked closely, she noticed that the guy didn't have a medallion or anything that looked like a weapon. This obviously makes things easier, and allows the theory that this man is not a contender to be accepted. But it is not clear why he is trying to hide information and tell as little as possible. In this case, there is nothing left but to try to prolong the conversation. Of all the questions listed below, Charlie was interested in only one, about why a girl was constantly losing her life and being reborn in the same place. He wanted to know more about what it meant and how it could be. In general, Lara herself did not understand how it could be explained. But then she said that in the literal sense, she is locked in the tower, and all the time she loses her life at the hands of challengers and is reborn in the same place. It is worth the warriors only to see her, so they immediately, without much thought, attack, although they could just pass by, seeing in front of them a small defenseless girl. Lara had the theory that she looked like a monster, but from the way Charlie looked at her, she didn't. After that story, the boy had become more talkative, and he'd accepted the theory that it was true. Now he wondered how Lara had gotten here in the first place. In this regard, everything is quite simple. When the cycle once again repeated, Lara just could not stand it, and left her place, and began to wander through the labyrinth, then took in his hands a lantern, which accidentally found, and further along the road came across a portal, and not thinking long decided to jump into it. The girl eventually traveled here, through that mysterious hole in the ceiling over there. The way Charlie reacted, he wasn't exactly impressed with the story, and he said he was going to show Lara another mysterious hole through which she could get back to the first floor. When she heard what Charlie asked her to do, she immediately said that she couldn't do it, because the challengers would start destroying her again, and this cycle would repeat endlessly. The guy in turn didn't see it as a problem, because Lara would be reborn anyway. Apparently he still cannot realize that the girl got into the tower, and no matter how many times she walks on the first floor, the exit could not find. She has been destroyed so many times that everything in her head is merged into one memory. At this rate, she will completely forget who she is, and for the rest of her days will remain here. But even with such a bitter story, Charlie could not follow it, except to return to the first floor and continue to ask for help from the applicants, because it was the only thing that Lara could do. In that case, the girl said, if the man does not want to help her, then at least let him tell her where the exit is. Unfortunately, even for such an elementary question, he had a far from pleasant answer. Is a place that Lara will never be able to open with her own hands, because the exit is on the 10th floor. In that case, the girl thanked him for the information, turned around and started running away in an unknown direction. Of course, the man tried to stop her, and reminded her in every possible way that she would not be able to get out, but Lara did not listen to him, because despite all the sad predictions, she was ready to do anything to get out and start living a normal life again. When the guy realized that the matter smells hot, he immediately contacted his colleague through the earpiece, and clarified some questions from him, and then immediately caught up with Lara and grabbed her by the shoulder. In this case, he had nothing else to do but to offer her to go with him. Lara initially refused, because she was 100% sure that the man would just send her downstairs, but in fact it was not so. The guys would go together to the 10th floor. Because Charlie has some unfinished business there, and in principle he doesn't mind to take the girl with him as a companion and at the same time help her to get out. Also, don't forget that even here there are a lot of monsters, and the girl just doesn't have the abilities to resist them, at least somehow. To be honest, Lara was just shocked by this offer, because just a moment ago, this man said he'd bring her back, and now he's already offering to climb to the 10th floor. But no matter how you look at it, it's basically the only option a girl can rely on. After only a few minutes, though without much enthusiasm, the girl agreed, simply on the basis that she had no other choice. Since the road ahead of them was a long one, Lara got bored of walking in silence rather quickly, and decided to ask again the questions she had not received an answer to, and of course add new ones. In principle, Charlie didn't mind because he, like her, was bored enough to go and just be silent. But even so, they didn't have any constructive dialogue, because the guy answered all the questions they asked with just one or a couple of words, without much explanation. To put it mildly, Lara did not like it very much. She could not understand why it is so difficult to answer normally, especially when you invite a person to go with you. At one point the girl felt something touching her leg. It was one of the monsters of the forest, which showed a desire to drag her to himself. Charlie looked at it from the side and just couldn't understand why this plant was attacking Lara with such great enthusiasm, and while he stood there puzzled, the girl was completely wrapped around him for just a couple of minutes and began to squeeze with all her might. Then this living flower released its pollen on the girl, untied and just threw back down. The fall was so hard that it became very difficult for her to breathe. The strength gradually left the body, and all the symptoms directly said that if nothing is not done in time, Lara will lose her life. But judging by the way Charlie is actively trying to help, there's probably no chance of salvation. When her life was cut short again, she began to think that maybe it wasn't the tower that was cursed, but her. Because other people had no problem going in and out of the tower, and coming back when they wanted to. But it was no time to cry. Lara had moved back to her usual place, which meant that it was time to get up and start acting again. Then, almost immediately after waking up, the girl heard some footsteps. It was quite strange for her, because no one had ever come to her so quickly. This time Lara was lucky to meet Charlie much earlier than usual. She even had time to be happy, to address him as her friend, but everything turned out to be not so simple. The thing is that the guy didn't remember her at all, and immediately decided to ask if they knew each other. Now at best Lara will have to tell everything again, and at worst, Charlie will not want to behave like last time and will want to destroy her. Initially the girl even assumed that she was mistaken, but in comparison they were identical, only the clothes are different. The girl reminded him at once that in the course of the hike she had been caught by some plant, forced to breathe its poisonous pollen, and then the poison had done its work. Charlie at this time just stood and watched, though he had promised to take her to the lowest floor of the house. Surprisingly, after the story, the guy remembered everything, and confirmed that what was happening to her was indeed a serious problem, but he was insanely annoyed that it was now. Because there are other things to do besides that. But there was nowhere else to go, So Charlie went to his virtual inventory and took out a unique item that could be used to create so-called mysterious holes to instantly move from one point of the dungeon to another. Charlie started the process of drilling the wall. At the same moment Lara heard footsteps, and the problem was that they were already as close as possible. Even in spite of such a stressful situation, the guy, instead of stopping, accelerated, and reached the desired result in time. As soon as everything was ready, he grabbed Lara's hand and took her into the portal. This time the guys also moved to the same forest, but for some reason the landing was not so soft, unlike in the past. But as they say, the main thing is alive, and the bruises will come off in time. Since all remained unharmed, it was decided not to stand still for a long time, and immediately go on the road. Only the most important thing this time to be more attentive to just foolishly not to lose your life from some rabid plant. Ahead of the whole 10 floors and further monsters will only be more difficult. Looking at the girl, Charlie realized that at the moment she was in a very strange state, because in order to continue the journey it is necessary to have at least the basic indicators of strength, and she had everything below the norm. Lara started to worry about it, if there was no other way, and the guy had promised her that she would be able to continue. Charlie was getting tired of being reminded of his promise by the girl, but he remembered it well enough not to renege on his words, and he was busy trying to figure out how to get around it. Then looking at the tree with the birdhouse, using his magic, the guy summoned it, and it immediately came out. Lara didn't know how to react to that, so she thought it would be nice to say hello to her. She got a greeting in return, and a small compliment on her appearance as well. The bird immediately asked her who she was, because it was obvious to her that Lara hadn't called her. But there wasn't much more to say besides introducing herself. Charlie then asked the girl if she could see the bird and if she could talk to it. As soon as both questions were answered in the affirmative, Charlie's head snapped up and he didn't know what to do next, because the situation was getting more and more confusing each time. Since Lara is a sensitive person, this kind of reaction is alarming to say the least, and she always wants an explanation. In general, with the help of this bird you can conclude a unique contract. As a rule it is carried by all novice applicants, because it increases statistics and constantly helps. But considering the fact that Lara understands it perfectly, it makes the task much easier, and makes it much more effective in any tense situations. The peculiarity of this assistant is that he could only be seen by the applicants, but as it turned out the girl can do it too, and she also understands his language, so this method is more than suitable. But now we need to figure out how to make a contract, because Lara can't do it. Initially, the girl had the idea that Charlie formalized a double contract on himself, and gave her an assistant. In general, such an action is impossible, but even in this case there are nuances, so at least it is worth a try, and then based on the result to think about what to do next. In this case, Lara has absolutely nothing to do, but just stand waiting for Charlie to try all possible options to conclude this contract. By the way, the assistant stated that he liked the girl very much, so it is safe to say that the chances of success immediately increased several times over. In the end, after only a few minutes, everything went well, as evidenced by the fact that Lara had a small hologram on her arm, and Charlie also said that from now on the girl's personal statistics should increase. But from the look on his face, it's hard to tell if he's happy about it. He described his reaction by saying that success is a deviation from the norm, and the number of problems from this only increases. Maybe the guy is right about something, but in the girl's opinion it is necessary to think positively, because from now on she can continue her way to the exit. Of course this is true, but there is a small nuance. The increase in personal statistics at the expense of the assistant are not permanent, they're that in general. So far, the overall performance is still terrible and you should definitely think of something else. Also equally important is the equipment, because at some point, it can save a life and will not have to start over. After a few minutes of reflection, Lara realized that she should at least try to find the armor, because the increase in personal statistics is only a temporary effect, and if you lose your life, being even on the 5th floor, the girl will still move to the 1st. And the improvement of the assistant will immediately disappear. At the same moment, Charlie remembered that there are hidden stores in Babylon, where you can buy special potions and use them to raise your stats to the minimum allowable values, and if you have enough money you can buy equipment there as well. And now comes in the move helper. He immediately started telling everyone that aspiring aspirants are best advised to look out for the beginner's gear package. At the moment it's at a super special price with great value for money, and is in high demand. But since Charlie knew as much about armor and potions as he did, he decided to turn off the consent to receive advertising information so that the assistant wouldn't distract them with trivial matters. The goal was set, and now they had to get to those stores to make their purchases. Laura realized that he was just as taciturn as last time, so she promised that even in her worst state of mind, she wouldn't ask him anything, as long as she didn't distract him. During the journey, the girl began to notice that the further they go, the more the air changes, and then her head began to come to the most bad thoughts, like that they may soon meet a monster, lose their lives and so on. Probably right now in this air there is some negative enzyme. The assistant does not sleep, and as soon as he notices that Laura is not comfortable, he immediately tries to find out how she is doing and how she feels. With the help of such minimal actions, he constantly distracts the girl, and does not allow her to fully immerse herself. Initially she answered that she was fine, but then she panicked, because she saw a strange pollen around her, and thought it was the same one that had suffocated her last time. The situation got worse as Laura began to see very poorly, and couldn't see where the assistant and Charlie were. The good guy noticed in time that the girl began to lag behind, came back to help her, and inform her that at the moment this pollen does not pose any danger to her, so it is perfectly safe to pass this area. The main thing is to keep yourself in control, and do not let fear take over. The first few minutes after these words the girl felt better, but then she began to hold her breath again, because her body simply refused to accept such dirty air. On the way Laura saw a house, and immediately wanted to enter it, because she was sure that the air there is definitely all right. Charlie stopped her just before the entrance, and told her she couldn't go in there because it was the gatekeeper's room. These are powerful creatures that are inside and guard each floor. If they went in together, they couldn't get out until one of them was dead. Since Laura hadn't seen any large passages besides this door, she allowed herself to wonder where they would go in that case. As it turned out, there was a little trick called the back entrance. It was considered safer, and no one would have to be sacrificed. The funny thing is, it's right next to the main entrance, in a nearby tree. In general, alternate entrances can only be made in special places. This particular one is unique in that the other contenders don't know about it, which allows Charlie to be always hours ahead of his competitors. It is also important to hurry, because the passage to the second underground floor closes quite quickly. Going inside, Laura finally came to the realization that to go down to the 10th underground floor she will not be able to, which means that at least 8 more times, she will have to jump into the unknown. In the end, after a warm, sunny summer, the boys moved into a terrible winter. Because the girl had no warm clothes at all, she began to freeze almost immediately. But at least Charlie thought with his head and got her something really warm. The assistant also congratulated the girl on moving to the next floor, and warned that this place is filled with cold energy. It is important to always watch your status. If a person loses his life due to frostbite, he returns to the initial stage with reduced health. On the way you will have to avoid a blizzard and bypass the ice prison from which it is impossible to escape in order to reach the Snow Queen. From all the words of the assistant, it was possible to understand only one thing, that if a person loses his life, he finds himself in an even more difficult situation. It also confirmed the fact that there were people in the tower who were also constantly losing their lives and being reborn, and then they talked about some quests. But Laura decided not to get into it, so as not to bother Charlie. Realizing that there were quite a few people from the Celestial Island on the second floor, the girl remembered her brother. For sure he was still in Babylon, but the only question was on which floor. Suddenly she had the brilliant idea to ask her assistant if he could find people. The assistant replied that he could only find the boy who gives quests on this floor. Then he flew over to Charlie, and told him that Laura was weird, because even though she had activated the ban on quests, she could still do them, so how could that be? After a bit of consultation, the guys decided to tell that one quest, out of all the proposed, they cannot manage to block. It is called the Will of the Locked Boy. It means that this task was put forward by the brother of the girl and it is mandatory to perform. After hearing this information, Lara was simply shocked. It turns out that all this time the guys knew some information about her brother, and just kept silent, although they understood how much she was worried about it. When everything became clear, the guys asked not to ask too many questions, because after meeting with him everything will immediately fall into place. After a while, the guys got to the glacier, and began the process of preparation for the fulfillment of the said quest. Its essence is to use fire to melt the ice and get out of the ice prison brother. But not everything is so simple, as the winter here is very harsh. Ordinary torches will not work. In this case, Charlie will have to sacrifice his special torches, which are filled with the breath of the blue dragon. It is a very powerful flame that can withstand simply huge temperatures, and even melt ice to get his brother. As soon as such a thing fell into Lara's hands, she was simply delighted, and immediately began to wonder where the guy was able to get them. But in response there was only an urgent request not to fool around and to get to work as soon as possible, because the guys are already delayed enough. In the process, for safety reasons, the guy urged the girl not to touch the snow for too long, because her hands would definitely freeze and even crying would not help, because it was not designed for such a low temperature. And even though these torches are quite powerful, the ice could not be melted in a matter of minutes, and when Lara tried to find out if it was normal, she was simply told to just keep working, because soon the ice should give its first crack and gradually melt. In the moment of waiting, the girl remembered the words that Babylon could only disappear if all the monsters in it were defeated. But since it still existed, it could only mean one thing, that no one had ever made it to the top floor. Of course, Lara wanted to share this information with Charlie, and to hear some positive answer from him, but considering that he is not at all talkative, the girl decided to hold back, so as not to accidentally provoke a conflict situation, and not to quarrel with him. In the meantime, the ice had finally melted, and a passage opened up before the boys, further into the endless winter horizon. When Lara saw all this beauty, she even began to doubt whether this was really the tower she knew about, because it was very hard to imagine how Babylon could fit all this in it. After walking only a few meters forward, the girl found Tyler lying on the floor, who had probably already received severe frostbite, and moved with great difficulty. As soon as the guy felt that something approached him, he immediately reported that he was about to lose his life. And before it happened, he asked to hear the last will and testament. According to the guy's story, his own sister brought him to this place and left him, so that she would be punished. He wished to pass this information to the guards, so that they would spread the word about this case in the city and gave the name of the potential offender. Then, hugging the challenger's leg, Tyler repeated it again so that he would be heard. Lara, in turn, had to fully agree with his words to calm down, and only then did she have a chance to ask a counter question. She couldn't believe that her own brother couldn't recognize her, and because of the realization that she could lose him right now, she just started screaming. But unfortunately it didn't help at all. Tyler was only talking about his last will, and even looking straight into her eyes, he couldn't remember anything. A little later his heart stopped beating completely, and he fell into the girl's arms. So far she did not realize what had happened to him, so she did not react in any way, and when she began to guess, she just prayed to God in her head that he was still alive. But unfortunately it did not help, and as soon as Charlie realized that it was the end, he immediately asked the girl to stop this senseless embrace, because they needed to move on. Lara didn't like his cold-bloodedness, so she wondered how he could just walk away when a man had lost his life in front of him. In response, the man said that the girl herself had left him, so he didn't see any point in sticking around. It is quite difficult to answer such an argument, because Lara doesn't remember anything at all, and even when she tries, she still fails, but if she reasoned logically, she would never do it in her right mind. In such a case there could be only two outcomes of events. The first one was that it didn't happen at all, and the second one was that someone deliberately fooled her once and made her commit such a terrible crime. Despite such a serious story from Tyler's side, the man in no way condemned Lara, because he didn't know all the details and couldn't sensibly estimate who was guilty here. When the girl started to throw a tantrum, Charlie immediately calmed her down and reminded her that soon her brother would be reborn again, so she shouldn't follow his body for a long time, so as not to delay the process. In that case, the girl immediately said that she would not go anywhere and would wait to take her brother with her. After all, realizing the fact that he could have been taken away, her conscience would simply not allow her to move on and return to her parents alone, leaving Tyler in the tower, endlessly deprived of life. Then the assistant played a very important role, because he supported the girl in her choice and said that it was much more interesting with her. Initially, everything went as usual, because according to the rules Charlie could not refuse the quest, because he does not want to wait. It is also important to take into account that this quest did not belong to him, but a little thinking with his brain, the man remembered that the assistant they have in common, so through him still managed to close the task. Tyler suddenly rises abruptly, and seeing the challenger in front of him, he starts telling him about his sister again, and begs him to give the information to the guards. For some reason, this time he was very eager to approach Charlie, and even though his sister was holding his leg, he pretended not to see her. And when he was very cold, he said again that he was about to lose his life. Frankly speaking, in this situation he behaved like an NPC, because he kept repeating the same phrases. If he were a real person, he would at least not arbitrarily change words, but even that didn't happen. So the question of how real he was still open. Realizing that she probably wouldn't be able to meet him again, Lara began to cry bitterly. And since the quest had been disabled, instead of losing her life, despite the bitter cold, Tyler simply got up and left in an unknown direction. Toward the end of the day, they stopped at a cabin to rest and have a short break before they went on their way. Because Lara had a very sad face the whole evening, Charlie decided to ask her how long she planned to be frazzled, where all the enthusiasm and desire to leave Babylon had disappeared to. It wasn't really that bad, but the girl was trying to figure out if someone had really locked them in the tower or if she had wanted to come here just to get rid of Tyler. Such stupid thoughts in her head started to appear after their meeting, because the guy spoke too confidently, and Lara was very impressionable. As soon as the guy realized that now a very long story could start, he interrupted Lara and said that she had to get ready for sleep, because her health indicators were practically at zero, and added that it was better to lie down to rest, because during sleep the recovery rate increased. But given her psychological state, she couldn't even hope to go to bed, because at the moment she just needed someone to talk to share her thoughts, and to hear support, but apparently Charlie wasn't the one to give it to her, because he wasn't even listening. Lara's biggest concern at the moment was that a man had lost his life right in front of her eyes, and Charlie didn't appreciate her concern at all, because Tyler would be reborn anyway and the cycle would repeat itself. But isn't taking a life that ends in rebirth worth mourning and considered normal? If the girl was so concerned about this question, Charlie suggested that she wait until they got to the 10th floor of the Babylon, and ask it to the so-called Germangand, the master of the tower and the gatekeeper of the 10th floor. The most important thing is that he should be in a good mood, and then you'll get answers to everything. After these words Lara was very thoughtful, and then she just collapsed from exhaustion. It wasn't right to say that, but Charlie was glad that it had finally happened, because she hadn't stopped talking for a minute and was disturbing everyone's rest. The most important thing now was that she should be able to recover at least half of her strength overnight. When suddenly the assistant showed up and informed him that the server maintenance would start in exactly 24 hours, which meant that it would be advisable to log out soon in order to continue playing safely and comfortably. Charlie reacted as strongly as possible, and asked the assistant to forget about logging out of the system. He reasoned that Lara was pretty weird, no one knew what would happen if she went offline, and things like routine maintenance weren't a problem when she was around Charlie. The deputy has absolutely nothing to worry about. Then, while the girl was sleeping, the guy again decided to look at her personal stats, and was disappointed to say the least because of the fact that it was below the plinth. In that case, he had nothing else to do but to seriously consider buying armor, because there is simply no other way out of this situation. Also, that without problems Lara could move on the floors, need to think how to increase her personal level, because if you do it only with the help of potions, may cost too much and Charlie will not be able to afford it financially. In this case, there should always be an alternative option. At the same time, the girl had a terrible dream, where she again moved to the first floor, and instead of the usual challengers, met her brother, who kept saying that Lara betrayed him and slowly began to pull out his sword. And when the situation became critical, the guy decided not to waste a minute and woke her up to find out what had happened and how she was feeling. Due to the fact that the immersion in sleep was maximum, immediately after waking up the girl rose sharply and for some time just tried to catch her breath. As soon as it was possible to speak, Lara said that she was almost 100% sure that when she woke up, she would already be on the first floor. After hearing that, he immediately thought that the girl was afraid of his hand, but she immediately denied it and said that it was just a terrible dream. Since Charlie was sure that Lara was just a normal Babylon NPC with her own weirdness, he was a little shocked. Because for the first time in his life he heard that they could dream, because it even sounds absurd. But since there was no time to dwell on it for too long, the guy asked her to get ready because it was time to hit the road. This time the emergency exit was also located in the most inconspicuous place. To get to it, the guys had to move the nightstand and open a secret door in the floor. To Lara not to worry too much, Charlie decided to go down first and show her that it is not really high here. But even though she realized it, she was in no hurry, and wanted to do it as carefully as possible. As the process dragged on, Charlie just couldn't stand it, grabbed her leg and dragged her down with all his might. As soon as Lara landed, she immediately lost most of her health. To be honest, Charlie couldn't even think that falling from such a small height would cause any problems, and he didn't even know what to say about it. Lara was very angry, and she couldn't understand why he'd done that, because he could have just said, "Hurry up," or something like that. Even realizing that the guy was wrong, he still decided not to apologize for his action, but just helped the girl up and suggested that she go to the store as soon as possible. In response, the assistant said that it was impossible to use the store's services while the server was being serviced. It was at this point that Lara first heard such strange words for her, like server maintenance, and so on, and she still had no idea that she was in the game. As soon as she wanted to ask the assistant about it, Charlie interrupted her with the words that there was no trace of her moping left. Lara initially wondered why such a cold man would ask about her well-being. But even though everything seemed fine, it didn't mean that deep down everything was fine. The girl still hadn't forgotten about her little brother, because if the words of that child from Winter were true, then she had become the sister of her abandoned little brother. Lara was also well aware that for now she didn't have enough strength to at least try to talk to the boy, because he only reacts to those people who are willing to listen to his last will. That's why there was nothing left but to hope that the brother would realize everything, would start to move towards the exit himself. Moreover, our heroine can't even take care of herself. She is still scared because of the thought that she might find herself on the first floor again, and make her way actually from the beginning. In response to such a touching story, Charlie told her that Lara would be back there for a while anyway. But it will happen not because the girl will lose her life, but because the server maintenance takes too much time. Further on the way to the cave, the assistant made his lighting a little brighter especially for Lara, so that she could see better, and in no case accidentally tripped over a rock. The Sparrow also said that this is just the tip of the iceberg. Since he is a support guide, he has a bunch of useful skills in his arsenal that make the gameplay easier in every way. Charlie started acting like an old grandfather as usual and asked her not to help her so often because the girl might get used to it. But even despite such a negative attitude from the driver's way, Lara was very pleased that at least someone cares about her and shows signs of attention, because it is very important for the girl and directly affects her morale. As far as our heroine knows, the assistant is only friendly with the challenger, but has no sense of affection. The role of these creatures is to guide and assist the challenger, but they can still express sympathy in this way. Looking at all this from the outside, Charlie began to theorize that there was something wrong with the assistant, because according to the terms of the contract, he had to be with Lara only if the guy asked him to be, but never when he wanted to be. The girl in turn did not understand why Charlie so often quarrels with the assistant. After all, he does nothing wrong, but nevertheless she is in any case madly glad that on her way she was lucky to meet such beautiful and clever people, who did not stand aside and agreed to help. Although the first impression was not very good, because the first time Lara grabbed the flower, the guy did not help her in any way, but just stood and watched what will happen next. But as they say, people change, and you can't judge people by just one thing. At the same time, while the guys were fighting among themselves, the girl noticed how right behind her back, on the ground, began to appear some circles. At first glance they seemed quite beautiful and harmless. But since Lara knew exactly where she was, immediately began to move away from them, because they were also moving. As soon as Charlie saw what was happening, he knew things were bad and did everything he could to protect the girl. Then just a few seconds later, a whole bunch of pins came out of the ground. So if Lara had been too close to those pins, she'd probably be on the first floor by now. Next, in order to remedy the situation a little, the guy wanted to get into his bag to take some unique item, but unfortunately he had absolutely nothing to do, because the pin hit her and threw her to the other side, so now it is not possible to get to her so easily. As time went on, the pins became so numerous that they even separated Lara and Charlie. At one point, because she was too scared, she even started screaming and asking the guy for help. But when she took a sober look at the situation, she quickly calmed down and began to think about what to do next. As it turned out later, these pins were not only special in that they suddenly appeared from under the earth, but also emitted a powerful stroke. Lara realized almost immediately that she wouldn't last long at this pace, so she wondered how Charlie was feeling now, and what he thought about it. But the problem was not solved, because no matter how hard she tried, she still could not hear what he was saying. It was as if the sound had been muffled to prevent people from communicating with each other. Lara didn't like the fact that the assistant wasn't visible either, because just at that moment he could be used for his intended purpose and start transmitting precious information through him. Then, quite by chance, she found the guy's bag lying on the floor. It was just a beautiful find, because the very torches that were filled with the blue dragon's breath had fallen out of it. If Lara got it right now she could clasp them, and thus try to melt all the ice pins to clear the way. After a while, the ice really started to melt, and the girl, hoping that all was well, began to move toward Charlie, but what she saw next shocked her, to say the least. Apparently the guy had failed to get a good position and the pins had done their dirty work. At that moment Lara didn't understand how this could happen and what to do next. Her only guide, who knew every floor perfectly, was in a very critical condition right now. Without wasting a minute, she immediately came closer to free him and give him first aid. He fell into her arms, and because he was very badly wounded, he gradually began to lose consciousness. But still, despite how bad it was, he said that everything was all right, and the most important thing was that he had survived, and the state of the matter could be solved right now. Charlie used his blood to draw a special drawing on the ground and called it an emergency call. After that, a deputy flew over to the guys and told them that they had already used 2 emergency calls out of 3 possible, and frankly, he was shocked at how bad they were. Since compliments weren't exactly what Charlie had called him here for, he immediately asked him to turn off the lights and activate the treatment. As a result, after the activation, the natural recovery rate increased by as much as 10%. This would speed up the process considerably, and it wouldn't be long before the guy was fully recovered. Then he decided to see how Lara was feeling, and if necessary, to ask the assistant to help her as well. But compared to how much Charlie had been hurt today, the girl's injuries were just scratches, and didn't need much attention. In that case, it was decided to have a little talk about Lara's rash actions. The guy urged that she should never jump into a fight again, at least without the minimum tools of protection or basic armor, because in 99% of cases, everything would end in teleportation to the first floor. In principle, the girl understood everything about it, but she wanted to hear some nice compliment for her help rather than another reproach. Then Charlie said that as soon as he could move, they would have to leave at once, because it was impossible to open the doors of the premium store here. And buying armor in a regular store, in this case, makes no sense at all, because Lara herself is very fragile and weak armor will not help her in any way. Also, potions to increase personal statistics can be purchased only in the premium store. In general, the assortment is much different, but the peculiarity of such stores is that they are deeper underground, and they can open whenever and wherever they want. In the course of the conversation, the girl had a question: does Charlie really not have at least one potion he could give away? Unfortunately, this is indeed true, because the guy almost never faces danger or gets injured, so he doesn't carry it around with him. From this, Lara concluded that the man is overconfident, because even though he doesn't get injured, anything is possible in this place. It's pretty hard to disagree with that, but specifically from this place, the guy absolutely could not expect to set up, because according to all the rules and regulations, the ice prison is forbidden to enter this area, and this passage must be safe, the so-called recreation area. The girl smiled and said that this was the Cursed Tower of Babylon, and the name itself suggested that there was no place inside that was completely safe. Now even Charlie was beginning to agree that there was definitely some kind of cursedness to this place. As soon as the guy had the opportunity to walk, the guys immediately moved a little further, and literally after a few meters of walking, right in front of them appeared a premium class store. Looking at the prices that were listed there, Charlie was speechless, because it is literally a robbery. The assistant argued that this floor is the most difficult to open a store on, so the commission is high. In fact, the items are much cheaper. In the end, even despite the crazy overpayment, Charlie still bought the first potion, which should be enough at first. By the way, after Lara's recommendation, the guy specifically bought 2 units of the product, 1 bottle for himself and 1 for her. As soon as the guys took their first sips, they immediately felt the impact of the positive effect. Specifically, the girl feels as if she was reborn. This is not surprising at all, because this is a premium class, top quality potions with strawberry flavor. Although this effect is temporary, but it really increased all the indicators to the maximum, and at the same time gave just an incredible charge of vigor. As soon as the guys got on the ice, Lara started to walk as carefully as possible, because she realized that if she fell down right now and took damage, the positive effect would be lost. On the way, Charlie discovered one unique object, so he immediately asked Lara to pay attention to it and pluck it. It turned out to be a magic mushroom, which is very rare in its kind, and the one who found it was very lucky. Lara was afraid to go near him, because she was worried that the situation would not happen like the last time, when some plant had destroyed her without any chance to save herself. But Charlie made it clear that he had no intention of destroying the girl, and even if he had, he would have done it long ago. After such a harsh answer, all doubts fell away at once, and Lara realized that it was already unnecessary to remember this old story. After that, she went straight for the mushroom. And as soon as she picked it up, she immediately activated the quest called Gathering, the essence of which is to collect 15 more mushrooms. Also, for the successful start of the quest, the girl received improvements on all her personal statistics, and when she completes the mission, will be able to get experience points, and thus increase her personal level. In general, the best occupation to raise the level is considered hunting, but gathering is clearly safer, so more suitable. Then the guy took out a piece of paper, wrote something in it, and tore it up right in front of the girl. After that, a double experience effect was applied to her name for a full 24 hours, which means that now for every mushroom picked, Lara will get twice as much experience, which will greatly speed up the process. And it is desirable to pick them as much as possible, suddenly then it will be possible to sell on the black market for a good price. When the task was completely clear, the girl immediately went to its fulfillment, and was very happy with each mushroom found. When Charlie saw how happy she was, he allowed himself to smile for a moment, even though it was completely at odds with his formidable image. In this case, while Laura was busy with an important matter, the guy asked her not to go too far away, and he in turn began to create an emergency exit and in his mind tried to understand who she was, because at first glance no different from the usual NPC, but the way she worries about people contradicts everything. Then Charlie began to catch himself thinking that he really sympathizes with this girl, but in the back of his mind he realizes that if this is really an NPC, then as soon as the check is over and the game data is corrected, Laura won't remember anything at all. But on the other hand, this is the only way to find out the truth about her. But to be frank, Charlie is extremely hopeful that she will remember everything, because he really liked this person, but for now he is ready to open up completely, because he wants to know everything for sure, so that accidentally for a normal NPC not to confess his feelings. Charlie replied that he had it, and added that he was on his way to a meeting with the German Gand. Then they got to talking about the Sky Island. The user reported that even after all this time, no one had been able to find out what was going on with the Sky Island. After saying that, Charlie remembered that the programmer's reaction to the Sky Island had been overwhelming, but he couldn't believe that no one had figured it out yet. In this case, without wasting a minute, the guy decided to upload a report about this problem, to make a clear instruction on how to fix it. At the same moment, an unknown user kept writing to him and asking him not to refuse the deal. Realizing that it is very dangerous to conduct a transaction under faulty conditions, the guy replied that since the situation has changed, as well as the initial terms of the contract, he has no desire to take risks, because he prefers good reliable deals, without any pitfalls and future consequences. And Charlie couldn't understand why the people who'd made the deal with him needed his help. After all, they were able to manipulate even the verification system. As soon as the situation started to reach an impasse, to avoid answering all these questions, the customer said he would double the payment, just so the guy would finish the job. At the same moment, Laura came up to the guy and informed him that they had already completed the knowledge, so they could enter the portal to move to the next floor. Charlie couldn't hold her back, of course, so he just gave way. At the end of the correspondence, the customer decided to tell that the problem with the Sky Island was directly connected with Pandora's box, and added that in case the guy refused the deal right now, he would not be able to escape from responsibility, because the task was too serious. Now Charlie even regretted trying to find out more about the case, because the more he knew, the more he risked getting into trouble. The best option in the future would be to just do his task, and take his money after it was done. When the guys moved, Laura was shocked at what was surrounding her at the moment. Because of the intense fear, the girl grabbed her hand, and once again repeated that this tower is definitely cursed. The assistant, unlike everyone else, was in a very good mood, and again congratulated the guys on the transition to the new floor. This is the city of the bereft of life. Here it is necessary to move and avoid the darkness, in the depths of which the bereft of life awakens, and it is also important to know that with the coming of night begins the race of the cursed Knight of Ducklin. At the end of the path on this floor will appear a secret door that will lead to the next. Out of curiosity, the girl immediately asked who is Dolan. In response, the assistant said that it is a knight who looks very peculiar, and rides on his black horse on the third stage of the dungeon, and is the gatekeeper of this place, that is, the first heavy boss that Laura and Charlie will have to overcome.